The standard narrative about modern food security goes something like this. As long as you have money in your account and a truck to haul the haul, the grocery store shelf will stay full. It is a comforting post-industrial illusion. But right now, inside the climate-controlled aisles of the world's largest retailer, a silent, systematic contraction is underway that has nothing to do with panicking shoppers or viral supply chain meltdowns. Consider a single, mathematically precise anomaly. In early 2024, the United States beef cattle inventory dropped to 87.2 million head. That is not a temporary seasonal dip. That is the lowest total recorded in the United States since 1951, a time when the American population was less than half of what it is today. You cannot manufacture a 4-year-old steer on a software schedule, nor can you speed up the biological gestation of an animal through capital injection. But the real crisis isn't just that beef is getting expensive. The real crisis is what happens when that systemic collapse cascades down the protein ladder into an architecture engineered entirely around razor-thin margins and hyper-efficient shelf allocation. Welcome to the mechanics of the quiet erasure. When retail analysts talk about Walmart, they rarely talk about food. They talk about velocity and floor yield. A single square foot of shelf space in a Walmart supercenter is treated with the same cold, geometric rigor as real estate in Midtown Manhattan. If a stock-keeping unit, a SKU, fails to meet a strict margin-to-turnover threshold, it doesn't get a clearance sticker. It doesn't trigger a press release. It simply stops getting reordered. The shelf tag remains for 3 weeks. Then a neighbor SKU expands its facing by 2 inches, and the product effectively ceases to exist for 40 million domestic shoppers. We are currently witnessing the simultaneous convergence of 5 distinct macro pressures, all hitting the humbled canned food aisle at the exact same moment. We have a historic domestic livestock deficit. We have European Union agricultural regulatory shifts and Mediterranean drought cycles. We have the lingering aftermath of avian influenza that wiped out over 100 million poultry birds, permanently resetting the baseline cost of animal feed and facility biosecurity. We have international maritime logistics bottlenecks, where container spot rates from Southeast Asia fluctuate wildly based on regional geopolitical choke points. And underneath all of it sits a mundane, brutal industrial reality. The price of food-grade tin-plate steel and the specialized polymer linings required to keep acidic foods from dissolving their own containers. Most consumers operate under the assumption that if a product is in trouble, they will see a barren wire shelf with an apology sign. But modern corporate inventory management doesn't work through sudden depletion. It works through silent rationalization. Walmart isn't running out of food. Walmart is systematically pruning the variety, the regional pack sizes, the high-density nutritional options, and the independent brands that can no longer absorb a 30% surge in packaging logistics. What you are looking at right now across 11 specific canned staples is not a temporary distribution glitch. It is the beginning of a permanent structural shift in how low-cost, shelf-stable nutrition is manufactured, packaged, and distributed in North America. By the time the average consumer realizes their preferred brand, size, or formulation has disappeared, the supply contracts were liquidated 6 months prior. And the most dangerous part of this formula isn't the items you expect to be expensive. It is the unassuming, bottom-shelf redundancies, the humble cans that have sat unchanged for 3 generations, that are quietly facing total economic extinction. To understand how deep this trap goes, we have to look at the one commodity whose entire modern existence is bound to a biological timer set years before a single purchasing order was ever written. The structural vulnerability of the modern grocery shelf is not an accidental creation of recent events. It is the direct outcome of historical policy shifts, agricultural consolidation, and rigid industrial engineering over the past 5 decades. To understand why 11 specific canned goods are currently vanishing from Walmart locations across the United States, one must trace the convergence of agricultural policy, international trade dynamics, and packaging economics that transformed local food security into a hyper-fragile, globalized supply chain. The historical baseline of this system was established in the 1970s under United States Department of Agriculture policy shifts that encouraged farm consolidation and maximum yield production. Over the subsequent 40 years, small-scale diversified farming was systematically replaced by regional monocultures and concentrated animal feeding operations. This shift created unprecedented efficiency, but it eliminated geographic redundancy. By 2024, approximately 95% of all processing tomatoes produced in the United States originated from a single geographic region, California's Central Valley. When prolonged drought cycles and water allocation cutbacks hit the region, the entire domestic canning industry faced immediate yield compression. The historical buffer had been engineered out of the system in pursuit of lower unit costs. A parallel process occurred within the domestic livestock sector. The United States cattle inventory reached its historic peak in 1975 at over 132 million head. Subsequent economic pressures, rising land values, and escalating feed costs initiated a long-term contraction. Between 2020 and 2024, severe multi-year droughts across the High Plains forced ranchers to liquidate breeding herds rather than purchase expensive supplemental feed. By early 2024, the national herd had shrunk to 87.2 million head, the lowest level recorded since 1951. Because the life cycle of cattle requires roughly 3 to 4 years from breeding to market weight, this supply deficit created a fixed mathematical constraint that no market price increase could rapidly resolve. The corporate retail environment evolved in tandem with these agricultural shifts. During the 1990s, the adoption of electronic data interchange systems and just-in-time inventory management transformed how physical stores operated. Walmart pioneered the cross-docking distribution model, which eliminated long-term backroom storage at individual retail stores. Under this system, store shelves were designed to hold only enough inventory to cover the precise lead time between automated reorders from regional distribution centers. Inventory velocity became the primary metric of store profitability. This operational efficiency created a geographic trap. When external shocks occur, the system has no built-in buffer. In the canned protein sector, this structural fragility became fully visible following the 2022 highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak, which affected over 100 million poultry birds across 37 states. The loss of laying hens and broiler breeding stock caused immediate price spikes in fresh poultry and eggs. Consumers seeking lower-cost alternatives shifted heavily toward canned chicken, a category designed for stable, predictable demand rather than sudden volume surges. Concurrently, external trade decisions and material cost inflation disrupted the physical container supply. In 2018, the United States federal government imposed Section 232 tariffs on foreign steel and aluminum imports, setting baseline tariffs of 25% on foreign steel products. While intended to protect domestic mills, the policy significantly increased input costs for domestic can manufacturers using imported tinplate steel. Tinplate steel is a highly specialized, ultra-thin steel coated with tin, required to fabricate sanitary food containers that can withstand high-temperature industrial sterilization without oxidizing. Because domestic production of food-grade tinplate steel was insufficient to meet total canning demand, processors absorbed sustained cost increases on the physical container itself. By 2023, the raw packaging material represented up to 35% of the total cost of goods sold for low-cost canned items such as evaporated milk, refried beans, and tomato paste. When combined with elevated ocean freight rates, increased diesel transport costs, and industrial energy inflation, the margin on lower-tier canned items turned negative for many regional manufacturers. International fisheries management provides another clear historical example of hard biological limits colliding with market demand. Under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, federal bodies such as the North Pacific Fishery Management Council establish strict annual total allowable catch limits for wild Alaska salmon. These quotas are based on multi-year biological assessments of spawning escapement levels. When global demand for wild-caught proteins surged between 2021 and 2024, processors could not simply increase harvesting runs to capitalize on higher retail prices. The historical management frameworks intentionally capped harvest volumes to prevent population collapse, creating a hard supply ceiling. As a direct consequence of these historical policy choices and biological limits, major national retailers began executing systematic stock-keeping unit rationalizations. Rather than raising prices across every item and risking consumer pushback, retail algorithms identified lower margin, duplicate, or secondary options for elimination. The regional £3 family cans, low sodium variations, imported specialty brands, and multi-pack configurations were targeted first. The historical architecture built for maximum efficiency had reached its ultimate operational boundary, leaving retail chains with no choice but to quietly narrow the physical selection offered to the public. The ongoing reduction of shelf-stable food options across major retail distribution channels has reached a critical operational phase, marked by sharp conflicts between institutional supply chain management and consumer demand patterns. Corporate inventory data and agricultural sector reports confirm that the current depletion of specific canned goods at Walmart stores is the direct result of compounding cost pressures across four distinct operational domains: raw commodity availability, international regulatory frameworks, industrial processing expenses, and algorithmic retail space allocation. A detailed examination of the 11 targeted product categories reveals the specific operational mechanics driving their removal from physical retail locations. In the canned protein sector, the contraction is driven by historical lows in domestic raw material supplies. The United States beef herd reduction has directly elevated the wholesale price of trimmings and lean processing beef, which serve as the primary raw inputs for canned corned beef, canned chili, and processed soup formulations. Industrial meat processors, facing raw material price increases exceeding 30% over multi-year baselines, have systematically reallocated available beef supplies toward higher-margin fresh-cut markets, drastically cutting allocations for canned shelf-stable lines. Simultaneously, the canned poultry and seafood markets are absorbing severe external shocks. Following the loss of over 100 million birds due to highly pathogenic avian influenza, domestic poultry processors prioritized fresh retail cuts and food service contracts over canning operations. Canned chicken processors, operating on fixed-price annual supply contracts with major retailers, found themselves unable to secure adequate raw meat volumes without incurring unsustainable financial losses. In response to these protein deficits, consumer purchasing habits shifted towards secondary seafood alternatives, specifically canned sardines and mackerel. This sudden surge in secondary demand rapidly outpaced the harvest capacities of regional Atlantic and Pacific fisheries, which operate under strict seasonal catch quotas and limited processing plant infrastructure. International supply lines for imported canned goods face additional structural bottlenecks. The supply chain for imported canned tomatoes, specifically protected designation of origin San Marzano products from Italy's Campania region, has been severely disrupted by a combination of European agricultural climate shifts and rising transatlantic shipping expenses. Mediterranean growing regions experienced extreme weather events that reduced raw tomato yields, while European energy costs drove up the expenses associated with thermal processing and industrial canning. When these products arrived at United States ports, they encountered elevated import tariffs, harbor maintenance fees, and increased domestic trucking surcharges. Consequently, national retail buyers began dropping lower-volume imported Italian SKUs in favor of domestic California-packed options, effectively eliminating genuine imported varieties from standard store inventories. In the canned fruit and vegetable sectors, processing logistics have created additional margin compression. Canned pineapple, heavily dependent on international ocean transport from processing hubs in Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia, has been subject to continuous maritime freight volatility and currency fluctuations. The physical cost of importing heavy, liquid-packed steel containers across ocean transit routes has doubled relative to pre-2020 transport baselines. Furthermore, the specialized tin-plate steel cans required to preserve high-acid fruits like pineapple without internal corrosion have faced persistent manufacturing price increases. Retailers operating on strict profit-per-shelf inch metrics have responded by eliminating specialty cuts, such as pineapple spears and organic chunks, retaining only high-volume crushed and sliced options under proprietary store labels. The mechanics of this retail inventory contraction operate through automated corporate software rather than manual store-level decisions. Major retail chains utilize advanced inventory optimization algorithms that monitor real-time sales velocity, unit profitability, and supplier fulfillment rates across regional distribution networks. When a supplier requests a wholesale price increase to cover rising raw ingredient or packaging costs, the retailer's automated system evaluates whether the product can maintain its target sales margin at the higher retail price point. If the system projects a drop in inventory turnover, it automatically reduces the store-level reorder frequency or flags the SKU for complete removal during seasonal planogram resets. This systematic SKU rationalization creates a compounding effect across physical retail stores. As national brand manufacturers lose shelf space for secondary product lines, such as low-sodium canned chili, specialty canned salmon cuts, or niche brand refried beans, they reduce production runs for those specific items, further increasing unit manufacturing costs. In many instances, product lines are not formally discontinued by the manufacturer, but are instead relegated exclusively to e-commerce distribution channels where warehousing costs are lower and physical shelf space constraints do not apply. The operational reality facing consumers is not an overnight empty aisle, but a calculated, progressive narrowing of available choices. Standard retail planograms that previously featured 4 or 5 competing brands across multiple package sizes have been compressed to feature 2 primary options: the dominant national brand leader and the retailer's private label alternative. The secondary options, designed for specialized dietary requirements or specific culinary preferences, are systematically purged as corporate supply chains prioritize high-velocity, high-margin standardized inventory.